Hello again. We are Chris Lee, Max Barr, and Blake Lovell of Southeastern 16 here to preview one of the best Final Four matchups I've ever seen between Duke and Houston. These are two elite teams. Just absolutely cannot wait to watch both this and Florida Auburn. It will tip off sometime after Florida and Auburn's over. Those teams tip off at 5:09 Central on Saturday night. Max Barr, I know you've been waiting for this game as much as anybody. Get us started off with what you're looking for here.
If you're not excited for this matchup, you're not a true fan of college basketball. This is as good as it gets. Absolutely as good as it gets. So we had a spread open at 4.5 point favorite for Duke. Now that quickly got bumped up to 5. And now as we record this on Wednesday morning, has been bumped up to 5.5. Now that Auburn and Florida spread open at 2.5 stuck. So is still sitting 2.5. Not the case with this one. The money line has traveled about 70 cents in Duke's favor. Blake, I think we both were not surprised that the majority of the money was on the Duke side, but I think a movement of this much here, only on Wednesday, a little bit surprised that heavily towards the Blue Devils.
Yeah, I mean, look, everybody's asked me as we go into this. And by the way, people are like, wait a minute, what are the SEC guys doing the Final Four Duke Houston preview for? Well, because we know that one of the SEC teams is going to play one of these teams. And so we've kind of been covering, the Sweet 16 and beyond kind of like this. So we're like, come on, of course we're going to do a Duke Houston preview here. Because to me, it's like, so again, so someone asked, all right, which of these teams has that next gear that no one else has? To me, I still think it's Duke. I think Duke has a gear that no one else left has. And that's saying something, right? Because these are, as we said, it's the strongest group of Final Four teams we've ever seen statistically. But I still think at their best, if everyone's at their best, I think Duke still has another gear that I don't know if anyone else has. But I say that knowing that Max Barr put out and sent me just some wild stats on Houston. And so, Max, I'm going to give you the floor to talk about these because this is why I'm not just completely convinced. And it's kind of like the other game in a different way. We preview the other game. We talk about, hey, Florida is just, everyone's back in Florida here, it seems. Like, everyone is all in. Like, Duke Houston feels like a formality to people. Or, excuse me, Duke Florida feels like a formality to people. And I'm just like, and I'm not as convinced on that as I was maybe a week ago, if that was the possibility, right? Because I think when you look at this Houston team, they do some things that I think can really frustrate Duke. And Max, I'll give you the floor for the stats because I just think it's so wild to look at what this Houston team has accomplished this year. You can't just look at the 34-4, although that is impressive in and of itself, but it's how they've gotten to that 34-4, which is just absurd.
Well, Blake, just real quick to back your point up, people, they're not crazy for having the formality think it's Florida Duke. 14 straight favorites have won. I haven't seen an underdog win in years, basically, what it feels like. Why would you take a chance on an underdog now if you haven't seen one in the past 14 games? So I don't blame you. Now, here's where, if you dive a little bit deeper, where you can take a step back and be like, ooh, maybe it's not as simple as it looks. Here's some two crazy stats I found on Houston. So obviously, the record, the Big 12 record, only one loss that came in overtime. Houston has trailed by 10 points. Now, it was just 10. They've never trailed by 11, 12, 13. 10 points is their largest deficit of the entire season. And they trailed by 10 points for a total of 23 seconds. It was when Kansas went up on them 25-15, and in the next possession, Houston scored. That is the only time the entire season Houston has trailed by double digits. That's it. Those 20 seconds, that one possession, it was 25-15. Other than that, the entirety of Houston's season, they have either been winning or trailing by single digits. Now, here's an even crazier stat. Houston played 20 Big 12 games this year. They didn't trail for one single second in 8 of them. They led from tip to finish in 40% of their Big 12 games. Almost half the games they played in Big 12 play, they didn't trail for 1 second. So on the surface, Duke looks like an NBA team. Florida looks like world beaters at times. But take a step back and analyze it a little bit more, and you can see why these spreads are 1 and 2 possessions.
I keep looking at these 4 teams in the Final Four, and I'm convinced, and especially this one, what these teams only really need one thing. That's a time machine to take them to a different NCAA tournament. Because any other year, I mean, Duke would be the prohibitive favorite, no questions asked. Houston would be the same. Florida would be the same. Even Auburn would be favored to win a lot of these going away. And that's what's going to be a treat about this. You look at the weakness relatively of these teams. Houston, number 10 in offensive efficiency nationally. Duke, just 4th in defense. And we've got the number 1 offense in the country and the number 1 defense in the country. Both have looked unbeatable on those ends. I mean, I just can't get Houston and what it did to like Houston. Tennessee needed an act of Congress to hit a field goal for the first 30 minutes of that game. And Tennessee was a good offensive team. Duke, at times, I mean, you saw how easily it looked against Alabama, which is not an elite defensive team, but it's not a bad one. It had some size to counter what Duke can do. When you're kind of looking at the offense versus defense, Duke versus Houston, what do you guys see of note here?
I'll tell you what I see.
Yeah, go ahead.
Just, it's not going to be like a high possession game. So from that standpoint, like if you're just convinced that one side or the other, right? And especially I think like from the Duke standpoint, I think because of that, knowing that this game is going to be much more of a stylistic, sort of comparison between the two. Like, and again, like you can look at the numbers and say, well, okay, Houston plays at, what is it? Duke is 268 in tempo, like all that. Houston is, what is it? They're 360, right? So I just think when you look at the number of possessions maybe that are going to be in this game, and that plays to Houston's favor a little bit, I feel like, even though it's just one of those where you're trying to find a way. How do we close the gap, right, with the Duke, just because they are absurd and on another level offensively, like, right? I mean, we saw in those games against Arizona or Alabama. Like, I don't think this is going to be that. Like, this is going to be a little bit different. And I feel like if you're looking at it from that standpoint, just how completely rock solid Houston is in the half court, you've got to feel like if you're Kelvin Sampson, okay, like that is just running our type of game here and playing the style we know that we've put out those crazy stats this year. That's how it's happened, just because we've been able to play the game exactly how we need to play it from the tip. And then if we get off to a good start, we can kind of control the game the way we want with our defense, with the way, we're willing just to go down and say, hey, we're going to get what we want. We're not gonna play into the other team's hands. Then I think that obviously comes into it. But at the same time, it's like, hey, Duke's not out here just going, 14-second offensive possessions or anything. They're willing to go out and say, you want to try to beat us in the half court? Look who you're guarding. Look who you're trying to stop, right? And so it's man, what a matchup.
Yeah, and both teams are that they really grind you to a halt on the defensive end. The difference here, if you're looking for a distinction, offensively, Duke is much faster, 2 or 3 seconds average possession getting off a shot than is Houston, which grinds you on that end too.
Yeah, no question about it. Duke is going to be the team with the more confident, the more trust you can put into their offensive efficiency. No doubt about it. And especially after you see what Duke did to Alabama and that offense, just completely shutting them down. Just Mark Sears couldn't get into the lane. There was none of those drive and kick threes. They shut down everything. And so when you think about like, okay, well, how did Clemson almost score 80 on them then? How did Clemson beat Duke? The post-ups. It was feed Locken, feed Shefflin. Let's attack them and try to bully Duke down low. And then maybe things will soften up and things will open up. And as we keep it close in a grind, and then who knows, what happens when we're at home and you get into the late game. Clemson ends up winning that one. Duke hasn't played a team yet that has done that, dumping it inside to the bigs. Houston can try to do that with Juwan Roberts, he's going to have to make some tough shots. And he's capable. But he kind of has that, kind of mid-range, left-hand little float push shot type of game that he likes to do, rather than like using his physicality and weight to back down and get really close positioning into his, low post game. I don't know if that's going to work against Malawash and Flagg. Houston's going to have to hit their threes. The threes are going to be a huge piece in this game. And Eric Fawcett at the Florida Basketball Hour said this line in his breakdown of the game, and I thought it was it resonated with me. A 3-point basket in a game in the 80s, okay. A 3-point basket in a game that's 61-58 with a minute left means a whole lot more. And so if Houston goes, 8, 9, 10 of 20 from 3 in a game where teams are only getting to 60, that's half the points. That's huge. So I really think that it's going to be, does Houston make their threes or do they not?
Are we ready for picks?
Let me precede my pick by saying I'm turning 25 years old this month. I have Houston winning all of my bracket pools, and I will win close to $2,000
level stall.
if Houston wins. If Houston wins at all, rent is paid for May. So let me proceed by that. I have extreme bias going into this pick. And like I said, the 5.5, Houston has only trailed by 10 points once for 20 seconds this whole year. I think 5.5 is disrespectful to how good Houston has been, even with how incredible Duke has been. And with how slow this game is going to be, I think they've got a chance. I really do. But if I'm making a pick true to my beliefs on who I think is going to win the game, I'm going to pick Duke to win the game. I think Duke is the better, more well-rounded team that I can trust their offensive efficiency a little bit more. I'm picking Duke to win, but just Cougar Nation, I'm on my hands and knees already. I will be in a stance from tip to finish. I need Houston for my bracket pool, but putting the bias aside, I do think Duke wins the game.
Well, Max Barr, there was one other person in this video that also had Duke and Houston getting to this point in the tournament and had Houston advancing to the title game. That was me. And then I watch these games, and I'm like, holy smokes. Look at Duke. And then I read the analytics, which have been trying to tell us, and they've been really good about telling us what's coming around the corner. And I watch basketball, and I think a lot of this tournament seems to come down to who can get points more easily. Duke is just a little bit bigger across the board. I think that helps when you're trying to create your own shots. And you look in the profile, there's not a lot of bones to pick with any of these teams. But when you're looking to get easy points, which are not going to be easy against Duke, Houston is 327th in the country at the rate at which it gets its points from the foul line. Duke also doesn't put teams on the foul line that much. That's bad. The other thing is 2-point offense. Houston shoots 48.4% from 2. Duke gives up 43.3%. Again, I think that's where height comes in. It's harder to get off a shot against a guy that's 3 inches bigger than you, which Duke seems to be across the board. Additionally, both teams are really deep. I think I like Duke's star power and maybe even its depth a little bit better, though Houston's pretty elite there too. I just keep looking at things across the board, and everything suggests Duke to me, and that's where I'm going.
Kelvin Sampson, my favorite coach in the country. We've mentioned this many times, even in SEC land. He's my favorite coach out there. But unlike you two schmucks, I picked Duke to win it all before the tournament started, and I'm gonna stick with that because there is part of me that, like I said, I think stylistically, seeing how this game plays out. I mean, if Houston can get this game the way they need it to be, like Chris said, there is a difference in terms of the offensive possession length and all that. But the experience factor is one reason that I'm just, again, I mean, Kelvin Sampson's been here before. Like he's seen this before. And again, I think John Scheyer's doing a tremendous job. You don't just line up the talent and they just go out. I mean, Sometimes it's easier than others, right? But you got to put those guys in the right spot, and I think he's been tremendous at that this season, pushing the right buttons to get the best out of this Duke team that was coming in feeling like the team to beat. So I saw what Houston did against Tennessee. I've seen what Houston's done this season, and knowing this is a team that's only lost once in regulation, I'm like, are we sitting here saying that this team that's older than the other team isn't going to find a way and we're all going to pick against them? I guess we are, but I don't love it. I think this is another one just like the other game I said. I feel like everyone feels like it's a foregone conclusion that these top two favorites are going to win. As Max said, 14 in a row have done it. So keep picking it, I guess, is the way we're going to go. But I'm telling you, I think Houston can do some things to cause some issues for Duke. But I'm going to stick with my pre-tournament winner in the Blue Devils.
Yeah, I mean, again, I'm not going to say generational basketball teams. That might be a stretch, but it might not be, especially with Duke and Flagg and Knipple and those guys. I mean, these are two teams for the ages. Whoever loses, in my mind, does not damage the season the other one had. Just, again, wish we could put them in a different time and play in a different tournament.
Real quick, just because I forgot to mention one thing I wanted to note. Keep an eye on the foul trouble for JoJo Tugler. Him being on the floor versus off the floor, massive difference for Houston. If he picks up two quick ones, it might be over within 5 minutes. If he stays on the floor and he's only got 0 or 1 going in the second half, great spot to be for Houston. Watch Tugler's fouls.
We'll be here to cover it and talk about it afterwards. Be sure to hit the subscribe and like button so you can see that. For Max Barr, Blake Lovell, I'm Chris Lee. God bless you. Thanks for watching. We'll see you again soon at Southeastern 16.